Hello, my name is Frank Ash. I'm going to talk about identifying high-value market opportunities for farmed oysters. It's based on a study I conducted together with Robert Boda, Taryn Garlock, James Anderson and Andrew Rupicki, all at the University of Florida. And we would like to thank the University of Florida's seeded program for financial support for this research. The US market for oysters is highly heterogeneous, and this creates opportunities as well as barriers with respect to increasing revenue for oyster growers. The oyster market has two distinct market segments: a high-value oyster market, where the oysters are mostly sold on the half shell, and a lower-valued shocked oyster market, where most of the wild US oysters go, and where there's also strong import competition, often in different types of conserved varieties. Within these segments, there are also significant potential for variation in prices as size and flavor and other attributes vary. The lecture today is mostly focusing on the high-end market, that is, the oysters on the half shell. Seafood in general is a category where restaurants are highly important, and almost 70% of US seafood expenditures take place on restaurants. And oysters is definitely one of the segments where this is most strongly the case. Seafood prices in general vary with different kind of product attributes or product characteristics. And there's strong indication that this is the case also for oysters, as for instance production location is advertised. However, data availability has been a barrier to conduct systematic research on this topic, and what information we have tend to be mostly based on survey data. One available data source for an important market segment, that is the restaurants, is the restaurant menus, and that will be the main data source used in this study. But first, a quick look at the development in US farmed oyster production. As you can see, it varies quite a bit between the year, as it's important by biophysical conditions. But since the early 2000s, there has been a clearly increasing trend, making oyster farming or oyster culture one of the more successful of the aquaculture sectors in the United States. Trends in both imports and in consumption indicates that the US is moving toward a more raw, half-shell or premium-oriented oyster market. And this is one of the products that primarily is consumed at restaurants. Oysters can be transported live over significant distances, but the time they can be stored out of the water is in general not much more than a week. That is, then they start to die, and it's a problem for any seller if that starts occurring. We also know that oysters have a wide variety of attributes that can have value, and that they vary significantly by region. For instance, a study has shown that consumers prefer specific attributes over others related to stuff like smell, meat color, saltiness, and also credence attribute like location of the harvest. We also know that Gulf consumers perceive that the quality and safety of oysters from Apalachicola Bay and coastal Louisiana is higher than those from other wide water bodies, but that non-Gulf consumers have an opposite perception. We also know that frequent oyster consumers prefer farmed oysters to wild oysters, while infrequent consumers has the opposite perception. If we go and look at restaurant menus as a tool, this is the menu, or rather a part of the menu, from the Boulogne Tavern in New Orleans. They have one raw oyster dish, that is oysters from either the east or the west or the Gulf Coast. That is, they don't make that clear to start with, but will have that information. But basically very little information about the oysters that they are selling. As a counterexample, this is the EMC Seafood and Bar in Los Angeles, who have minta sweet oysters from Washington. They have Pacific plump oysters from Washington, they have Fanny Bay from British Columbia, they have Kushi from Vancouver Island, they have Kuamamudu from Humboldt Bay in California, and they have Fat Bastards from Seattle. And they have Fresh Uni from Santa Barbara. So there's a wide variety here in terms of how they are described, where they come from, and also what price they are fetching. Restaurants' menus as such can be a tool, in particular if you combine them with information about the restaurants themselves. So the tool in this study is to use the TripAdvisor database, where we search for fresh oyster products or restaurants that are selling only raw oysters. We do that for 20 cities in the US, that's all the larger cities by population, and then we make random draws of restaurants who do sell raw oysters in each city. The collected data include information such as the number of East Coast oysters offered, the number of West Coast oysters offered, the average price level of the restaurant, of course the price for each oyster category, the TripAdvisor rating, the number of oyster menu items, and specific attributes like brand name, grow out location, grow out method, oyster species, oyster taste, oyster size, to the extent that that information is available. I will now first present some descriptive statistics based on these data before we do more systematic analysis. The first thing we computed was the average price by the region where the restaurant is located. That is, we have divided the US into 4 regions: the Pacific, the Northeast, the Midwest, and the South, where the dividing line between the South and the Midwest goes in Virginia. Sorry, not the Midwest, the Northeast and the South. As you can see, Pacific oysters fetches the highest price. They are not that much lower in the Midwest and the Northeast, but they are significantly lower in the South. For the oysters where producing region is provided, that is the Gulf Coast, the East Coast and the West Coast, we also see the prices vary systematically, where the Gulf Coast has the clearly lowest price and the West Coast has the highest price. If we look at the menu where the oysters where that information is provided comes from, you have that in the South there is oysters from all 3 regions, plus a significant unspecified coast category, which mostly is Canadian oysters. But South is the only region where there's a significant presence of southern oysters. In the Midwest, it's fairly close that it's a third of the oysters come from respectively Canada, the East Coast and the West Coast. A tiny little chunk at 1% comes from the South. In the Northeast and in the Pacific, none of the oysters come from the South, and they are sort of not dominated, but have by far the largest market share with locally produced oysters. But they do have an important market segment consisting of oysters from the other region. And again, there is a not trivial share of imported oysters. When we look at number of oysters attributes, we see that approximately 40% of the restaurants in all regions are providing no information about the oysters beyond oysters on the half shell, so no attributes. A small share of the oysters or the restaurants are providing one attribute. This share is significantly higher in the Northeast, and then again a relatively large share, with the exception of Northeast, is providing 2 or more attributes, and these attributes have value. We see here that with non-attributes, the average price is $3.03 per oyster. That increased to $3.10 with one attribute and $3.45 with 2 attributes or more. And we have computed it for more attributes, but that doesn't impact the price very much. when you have all these different attributes that have potential value, they may vary systematically with each other. And to investigate that, we need to have a model that allows all the attributes to be present simultaneously. Type of models that do that is what is known as hedonic price models. And we estimated that based on these OYSTER data. A standard hedonic price model basically says that the price of a product, or in our case and most studies, the natural logarithm of the price, is a function of what attributes that characterizes it. So as such, in the equation here, the alpha parameter will be the average price, and then you have groups of variables, which for instance may be region for the first, consumption region for the second, and brand for the third, and show how they are impacting the price. And how much will then be showed by the estimated parameters here given by the B, C's, and D's. That's not that important, and I will actually not show you those numbers, but that's sort of the basic models that is the foundation for the next slide. Because in addition to what we learn with the descriptive statistics, which remains the same, we learn three things that are sort of important. One is that the price premium disappears locally. That is, Pacific oysters do not have a Pacific premium beyond the fact that Pacific producers get a good price wherever they sell oysters when they are being sold on the West Coast. Similarly, northeastern producers do not get an additional premium on top of what they get as Northeast producers when the oysters are being sold in Northeast. In the Midwest, of course, all the groups of producers are getting their premiums since there's no local producers there. And in the South, there's no premium, but there's also then a very small discount for the southern produced oysters. Of the other different attributes, brand is the only one that consistently provides value. There's a premium for two attributes and more, but we cannot identify any premiums with specific attributes. That is, a model that counts the number of attributes being sold shows that two attributes and more gives the highest priced oysters, but it doesn't seem to matter exactly which attributes this is. So to conclude then, prices of oysters vary systematically between US producer regions, with Gulf producers fetching the lowest price. Prices of oysters also vary systematically by where they are sold, but with significant discounts for oysters consumed in the region where they are produced. Product attributes are important, but it is, with the exception of brand, the number of attributes, not the specific attributes, that are most important. This creates opportunities for oyster producers, but based on what is available on the sample menus, this is opportunities that some Pacific and East Coast producers are utilizing, but Gulf producers to a much more limited extent. Thank you.